I'm going to go ahead and call to order the February 13th, 2023 Apex Planning Board meeting. Please bow your head for the invocation. Father God, thank you for another day here in the town of Apex. Give us the guidance to make the decisions that are best for the town, best for the residents of the town, as we are here to hear from them. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. Amen. We stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Diane, do we have any items of information?
Not today, thank you.
All right, thank you. I want to talk for a moment about the public comment section. The purpose of public comment is to allow the public to speak on items that do not appear on this agenda. Any member of the public wishing to comment on public hearing items can be called at the appropriate time later in this agenda. If you've not done so already, please sign in on my right, your left, for the appropriate item number. Public comment period is an opportunity for the public to express concerns or opinions, but is not intended to be a question and answer session. During public comment, the public may comment on any non-public hearing item, including new business items that appear in this agenda. Comments from the public on new business items will not be taken later in the agenda, so if you wish to speak on new business items, the public comment time is when you should do so. All comments are limited to 3 minutes. When the 3 minutes is up, I will ask that you wrap up your comments. If there is a large number of folks to speak on a particular item, the group would be limited to 9 minutes on that particular topic. Please do not be repetitive. At this point, we're going to talk about the consent of item 1, the minutes from the January 9th, 2023 meeting. I take it you all have read those minutes. Any comments, questions, or motion to approve?
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
I have a motion from Sarah. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And a second from Tina. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, passed unanimously. Item number 1, Shelley is going to talk to us about a potential motion regarding rezoning case 22 CZ 25, the Prince Dead End Road.
This item has actually been withdrawn from the agenda by the applicant.
All right. Thank you. Then we will move on to public hearing and possible motion regarding case 22 CZ 19, the Heights PUD.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
The Heights PUD is located in downtown Apex, close to the intersection of 55 and South Salem Street. As you can see, we're kind of at the center of town here. It actually borders on Harwood Street and South Salem Street, but fairly close to that main intersection. The site consists of 3 parcels, 2 whole parcels and 1 portion of one that totals 1.33 acres. As you can see, the parcel is vacant and generally wooded with a couple of cleared areas on the site. It's within the town's small town character overlay district, which means that there are slightly different rules that typically apply. I'll point some of those out as we go along. And it's within a 10-minute walk of downtown Apex. The applicant conducted a neighborhood meeting on August 30th, 2022. Acreage was later added, which required another neighborhood meeting. That one was held on December 15th, and both neighborhood meeting reports are attached to your staff report. The town's, the lots are currently zoned high-density single-family, and the applicant is proposing to rezone them to planned unit development conditional zoning. The 2045 land use map generally calls for office employment for the two whole pieces on this site, but it may be hard to see. There's a little tiny piece of medium density right there. If this rezoning is approved, it'll be automatically, the land use map will be automatically updated to high-density residential per state statutes. The proposed project is part of the area within the Apex Peakway that was studied by the 2019 Apex Downtown Master Plan and Parking Study. The housing study that was completed for the downtown plan recommended increasing the number and mixture of housing units within the Peakway and anticipated that over about the next 5 years or so, that the study area could absorb anywhere between 515 to 720 additional residential units, and this is of all types, single-family, townhouse, apartments, condos, etc. This project is located within the Justice Heights and South Salem portion of the study area, and that was one of the areas where we looked at things a little more closely and analyzed things a little bit more. This was partially to be sensitive to its history as a historically African-American neighborhood. The proposal for the downtown plan anticipated adding only about 15 dwelling units to this area. The intent was to preserve the existing housing and fill interior blocks with appropriately scaled and historically scaled buildings, anywhere from single family up to, say, 3 or 4 plexes, in addition to other potential options as well. The downtown plan really was envisioning the addition of neighborhood commercial and employment opportunities along South Salem Street, things that would provide convenient walkable uses and space for small businesses without having the barrier of crossing 55. As we know, 55 can be pretty intimidating to cross in that particular area. And with the future widening that's planned for that, that could get even worse. So that was the intent and the thought process behind it. This property is within half a mile of downtown, and the rezoning is proposing to add a maximum of 49 units of multifamily apartments or condos. They haven't decided whether it will be a rental or sales situation. The proposal supports the overall housing goals of the downtown plan, but doesn't include the recommended commercial uses along this portion of South Salem Street. Just to give you an idea, this is the parcel that we're looking at today, roughly. It's a little differently shaped than that, but fairly close. We did also receive a letter of impact from the school system, and it's included in your staff report as well. It indicates that elementary, middle, and high schools within the current assignment area are anticipated to have insufficient capacity for future students. So that's all 3 grade levels. School expansion or construction within the next 5 years may address some of those concerns at the elementary and high school levels, but the middle school was not anticipated at this point. The applicant's proposing the following uses for this project: condominium, multifamily or apartment, greenway, recreation facility private, park active, park passive, and utility minor. They have several architectural conditions in here. Primarily among them is that it will comply with the town's architectural conditions in the Small Town Character Overlay District section of the UDO, and those are laid out fairly clearly there. The building scale and mass for this building will be compatible with the established character of downtown Apex architecture. The building materials will include variety and diversity of colors, textures, and features, details of which will be shown in the master site plan. Just to give you an idea, this is the rendering that the architect came up with that staff has reviewed and recommended approval of. The building will not be required, sorry, I'm reading the wrong portion. The scale of the building will be appropriate to the building type and relate appropriately to the long-term vision of this neighborhood. Building elevations will comply with the architectural character laid out in the UDO for all multifamily requirements in the small town character. The materials that will be used will be durable materials. The front will have brick and masonry, hard coat stucco, not the faux stucco, but the hard cement version of it. Cementitious or wood siding, so no vinyl, and durable quality construction materials for the trim elements, including wood, aluminum storefront, and other types of systems. In addition, at the ground floor along the pedestrian pathways and the public rights-of-ways, exterior elements will also be clad in brick or traditional hard coat stucco, can't say that for some reason, cementitious siding, or high-quality metal trim and screening. The developer is anticipating that there will be at least one level of structured parking at the rear of the building, which will be screened with elements that carry on those architectural features that you see here. They'll be in scale with the type of window openings that we'll see. They'll have the right type of details like mullions or lattices across them to make sure that you can't see through that super clearly, but that it matches the rest of the building. There will be no unimproved concrete or steel structures visible from any right-of-way at all, and will conform with the durable materials section that I just read. The developer is proposing 49 units with a maximum building height of 60 feet and 4 stories, a maximum built-upon area of 75%, and a front building setback of 0 feet, so it could be up to the right-of-way line, which would still be behind the sidewalk, but up to, and a maximum building setback of 25 feet. That's to keep it close enough to the road that in case this developer has to sell the project after rezoning, that the building still feels like a downtown building. It's not set super far back with a whole bunch of parking behind it. But this developer is planning on bringing that building right up to the edge of the right-of-way to continue that downtown feel that we have in our other buildings. The parking and loading requirements will be based on 1.3 parking spaces per 1 and 2 bedroom dwelling unit. You've seen this before very recently. We have other apartment complexes that have come through in the last year and a half or so, where they're either in close proximity to other residential development, multiple transit options, provide affordable housing, or provide additional environmental services. And that staff has recommended that lower parking ratio instead of our typical, I think it's 1.5 for 1 and 2 bedroom units. So this is in keeping with some of those other projects that you've already seen recently. All other standards will comply with the town's UDO, so there are no other exceptions listed. Regarding RCA and buffers, because this is within the small town character district, and because this is, the intent is to keep that same kind of close-knit small town character feel, the area within that district is exempted from required RCA or buffers. So none of those are provided in this particular rezoning. It's a very tight site as it is, but that is consistent with the rest of our downtown area also. The applicant has also proposed an affordable housing condition. There are 2 different versions of this listed in your staff report, and that's because they have 2 different housing types that they're contemplating. And because of the way those work, we have to have 2 slightly different variations. One of them is for an apartment style, so a rental style situation. The other one is for condominiums, which is a sales situation. They require different types of documentation. For the apartments, they're proposing a minimum of 2 residential units for a minimum affordability period of 20 years to be occupied by low-income households earning no more than 80% of the Raleigh AMI. For the condominium option, again, it will be at least 2 housing units that will be sold at a price calculated upon 100% of the Raleigh AMI with a minimum affordability period of 10 years. The project will be served by Town of Apex water and sewer and electric. The utility design will be finalized at the site plan level stage. A conceptual utility plan is provided. There are options for connecting to public water and sewer in South Salem Street as well as Harwood Street. and the ultimate design for that will meet the town's master plans. The Heights PUD will also meet all of the town's requirements for watershed protection overlay districts in the UDO. So this means that all of their stormwater requirements will be met on site. And that's the 1 and the 10-year storm events. They'll use approved devices to control the stormwater and sediment runoff. We understand this was a concern that was asked during the neighborhood meeting, and they will be required to make sure that there's no off-site issues during construction or after everything is finished up. And this is reviewed by the town's engineering staff, and they do a great job. Stormwater devices will be landscaped and constructed in a way to make sure that any ponds or other types of SCMs will be an amenity to the development as well. And then the application or the proposal is to relocate and abandon a 30-foot public drainage easement that's on the northeast corner of the site. It is. I have to remember that north is over to my right. So it's this portion right here. And that'll go through all of the town's standard processes and everything. So it'll go through engineering review as well as a formal abandonment process before the town council.
So that area is closest to Salem, is that right?
Yes, sir. It's right at the corner of Salem and Harwood. It shouldn't impact the road too much. There might be some short-term closures, but most of what's going to happen will be on the site itself instead of in the right-of-way area. The bicycle and pedestrian system plan map shows 5-foot sidewalks along South Salem Street and Harwood Street. Those are existing. South Salem Street is also shown as a bike highway with proposed bicycle lanes on both the north and south side of the street. Sidewalk circulation will be provided around all the sides of the building, including connections made directly to South Salem Street and Harwood Street. Where sidewalk already exists within the public right-of-way, additional parallel sidewalks are not going to be required to achieve circulation around the building. So this is partly because it has that very close setback. There's no real point in having a sidewalk here and then 5 feet on the other side of a strip of grass having another sidewalk. It's expensive to maintain. It's also just really not very attractive at all. So the intent is that connections from the doorways will extend directly to those sidewalks, and then along the side and rear there will be additional sidewalks to allow people to safely move around the site without there having to be extra impervious surface or cost either for the town or the developer. Per the Apex Thoroughfare and Collector Street Plan map, South Salem Street is designated as an existing 3-lane thoroughfare. It requires 80 feet of right-of-way. The developer will be providing the 10 feet that they need to complete their half of that 80 feet. That right-of-way dedication will happen after site plans are reviewed and approved and everything. As shown on the PUD layout, there will be just the one access point onto Harwood Street. This is conceptual and may shift a little bit, but that's the intent, that there will be just that one access point. We also have a zoning condition that was offered by the applicant to provide and construct one bus stop along South Salem Street within the project boundaries. That exact location will determine at site plan stage. The bus stop will meet the approved Apex bus stop specifications and be within the town's public right-of-way if possible. There are a couple different options listed in here based on whether or not we have a bus servicing that stop at the time of construction or not. If a bus route is in operation to service the stop at the time of site plan approval, the developer shall be responsible for constructing the concrete site work and purchasing and installing a bench, trash can, and 2 bike racks. All the site work and amenities will comply with the town's standards. If we don't have a bus in service at that point, the developer will only be responsible for installing the concrete pad and sidewalk. No amenities will be required by the town. But if they decide at that point that they would like to install the bench or bike racks or things of those nature, then they can, even if the bus service won't stop there at the time of site plan approval. In that case, they'll just be used to satisfy the town's public amenity requirements. And of course, all of those will be required to meet the town's standards. Based on, per the UDO, this project is actually exempt from review by the Environmental Advisory Board because it's within the Small Town Character District. Despite that, the applicant has provided a few of our typical EAB zoning conditions to try to address that particular concern as well. Those are that at least 75% of the plant species used in the landscape design will be native species. Warm season grasses and landscaping that require less irrigation and chemicals will be planted to facilitate drought resistance. At least 2 pet waste stations will be installed within the development. And electrical vehicle charging spaces shall be provided at a 5% rate instead of the 3% rate that the UDO currently requires. This project was reviewed by Parks and Rec Advisory Commission on November 30th. They recommended a fee in lieu. It was a unanimous vote. They also suggested or presented the concept of a sidewalk connection from the West Street Park to this project. This was something that came up in the neighborhood, the second neighborhood meeting. And it was unanimously supported by the Advisory Commission. The applicant is not providing this as a zoning condition at this point because they haven't been able to do enough due diligence to determine if engineering-wise it's actually feasible. But that's their intent, and that's something that staff will be working on them to try to make happen to the best of our ability. We believe this would be an excellent amenity for both the development and anyone coming to and from the park. Planning staff recommends approval of the subdivision, the rezoning, excuse me, as proposed. Even though the land use designation doesn't include the residential units proposed in the Heights PUD, if the properties are rezoned, then that land use map will be amended per state law. And we believe that the proposed rezoning generally complies with the town's downtown master plan by providing up to 49 new residential dwelling units within a 10-minute walk of downtown. We believe it's reasonable and in the public interest because it encourages infill development, provides 2 affordable housing units, constructs a bus stop, and encourages walkability in a way that's consistent with the downtown master plan and parking study. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. The applicant is also here and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Shelley. Any questions for Shelley?
Yes, sir.
Hey there. So this project is a little bit close to my heart because I live in this neighborhood.
Yes, sir.
About like 3 blocks away. And I walked around my neighborhood like earlier this month to like just talk to people, kind of see what they felt. And for the most part, it's pretty much positive. But there were 2 things that kind of came up. And one was like traffic in general, because we already get quite a bit of traffic going down First Street, and like a cut around that corner, you know? And we were wondering if there was like any traffic study that was done as part of this, because eventually I think Harwood is supposed to be closed at South Salem with like the 55 widening project, I think. But
I would have to defer that, an answer about Harwood Street to Russell or Shannon. They might know more about that. I'm honestly not certain at this point. I didn't mean to interrupt, although I realize I just did.
No, it's fine.
We did not have a TIA done for this project. The UDO has very specific requirements and minimum thresholds for doing that because it is a fairly costly item for most of our developers. And the 49 units that are recommended didn't quite meet that threshold. That we don't normally like to project what we think the traffic will be without having some of that information. If you'd like something from someone who's a little bit more of an expert on that, then Russell is your guy, and I'm happy to turn it over to him. I don't anticipate that we're looking at a ton of extra traffic, just based on the amount that's already coming through Salem Street and 55, though.
I would actually add on to what Daniel is saying, because I live in the same neighborhood. I love this plan and the infill and being able to live so close to downtown. I'm a little jealous. I got a little extra walk from my place, but that Harwood and South Salem, it is just so close to that major intersection there. So I think maybe that's building on the concerns of neighbors. It's just even with the level of traffic now, it can be a little scary sometimes with people making lefts and rights out of that, so close to that intersection. So I
I
think
can certainly understand that. I've driven down Harwood a couple of times myself, and I get it. Trying to take a left out of Harwood onto Salem Street is a little tricky sometimes, and, you know, might give you a little adrenaline rush. But, so we can definitely look into that. I don't know that we can make them do a TIA for this particular project. What we can do is I can try to have answers about whether or not Harwood's expected to be closed in time for town council and take a closer look into that. If you look at the layout, they have tried to push this point as far away from the intersection as they can. There's really not, and we'll try to work with them to get that as far as we can without impinging on the adjacent neighbor too much. But they just don't have a lot of frontage on Harwood Street. And it really doesn't make sense to have them come out on Salem, because you've got Harwood and then you have the next road up, and they're pretty close together too, so we didn't really want another connection point right there. Plus, even though this project, on this particular sheet, this project looks large, it's actually not a lot of frontage at all. It's actually pretty narrow through here. It's big enough for just one apartment building as opposed to multiples through there, so there's not a lot of space for them to shift that. But we can definitely work with them to do as much as possible to address those conditions and those concerns. I agree that they're important ones to look into a little closer. Some of that will have to happen at site plan though, if this gets approved, just because we won't really have the survey data to look at the topography and everything until that point. You said you had 2 questions for me though.
It's, I did see that in the, I guess, petition process information that, I guess at one point it was proposed to have a right out onto Salem. Is that no longer
That is no longer the case.
the case? Okay.
Can you point on the map whereabouts the bus stop is proposed?
So
Or
at this
if it-
point, we don't have a specific location. We don't have a bus line that works on this particular site yet. But it would be somewhere along this frontage here, along South Salem Street. And that would have to be something that we'd look at more closely once we get the site plan information, partly because of the topography that I was just talking about and trying to figure out how far it needs to be from the intersection or how close it needs to be. And that can get a little tricky until you have all of that information in front of you. Yes, sir?
I think that the building is really cool. I like the density close to downtown. The question I have is, now that we have a cool architectural building, what about the hardscaping? Are we gonna do concrete from back of curb to the building and tree wells and underground the electric? Or is this gonna be a typical suburban type street with a urban type building?
Well, they're not putting additional concrete out there between what's on the existing sidewalk and the back, because the existing sidewalk comes pretty close to the edge of where they're gonna be dedicating their 10 feet. But we haven't discussed undergrounding the utilities and those items on this. There are no conditions about that on this particular rezoning.
Do you know if this is Duke or Apex Electric?
It'll be Apex Electric. I can definitely bring the applicant up, though, to answer your questions. Anything else for me?
Anything else for?
Yeah, Shelley, I just want to be clear. So you're saying there is South Salem Street, that's going to be a full access instead of right? Because on page 40 of our report says there's going to be right in, right out off of Salem.
It should be a right-in, right-out off of Harwood Street. If I have that wrong, then I apologize.
It says there's approximate location, right in, right in, right out, only entrance off of Salem Street, and it looks like it's on page 40.
There may be an error in the staff report. It's supposed to be full movement on Harwood Street. They originally came in with a recommendation looking at potentially right in, right out on Salem, but we had some concerns about the geometry with that on Salem Street. So what you're looking at is full movement on Harwood Street. And with the NC 55 project, we anticipate Harwood would close at Salem Street, and then that traffic would filter back through other local streets, back to NC 55 or back to Salem Street. And then also to circle back to the traffic study question, based on the number of units, this would fall below our traffic study threshold. So when they come in with site plans, we would not require a traffic impact analysis. they would fall below our threshold for any kind of off-site mitigation. So if there is off-site mitigation, that would be the responsibility of the town to look at that either in conjunction with the site plan or in the future if there are traffic studies requested in the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Yes.
Okay.
So zoom out a little bit for me as to how we're actually gonna get to this property if everything is coming from Harwood. If I'm coming from down by the post office to get to this property, how am I getting in there?
So one quick comment about what you just stated. If I have that wrong in my staff report, I believe you that you're reading it and I have it and it's in there wrong. I'll make sure that that gets corrected before we get to town council so that everything's correct in there. I'm gonna make myself a note of that.
It's a diagram on page 40. It just shows the location of the building. It just says, so I was actually
may be an
asking
old-
about South Salem Street, where it says that there is only a right in and right out entrance off of South Salem Street,
That-
not Harwood.
Mr. Royal, that may be
Yes.
part of the neighborhood meeting report from a version that was shown early.
That's my thought. I have 44 through 47 printed out in front of me, and that's the second neighborhood meeting report. So I think that you might be looking at the first one before we had a chance to review everything and get new drawings out there for them.
Okay.
Back up the existing street network.
Yep, just one second. So to answer your question, Mr. Skinner, this is 55.
Right.
You would come down 55 and you'd take a right, whoops, I went too far. Take a right onto here, and then you would take another right onto Harwood Street, and then you would come into the driveway right here, taking a left.
Okay.
This is the only picture I have that has a good view of both 55 and Salem Street.
Right.
I will make sure I have a better map before we get to town
Council
council.
would definitely ask for that, yeah.
Shelley, I have a question as it relates to, the,
Closes at Salem Street. That's
Sorry,
also
Ms.
affecting
Sherman.
Existing street network.
This is the best I have as far as an existing street
I
network.
thought you had something.
I mean,
Showed
this
the
is
street names.
Harwood.
Okay. Yeah, this is where we need to go back to right here. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, you had a question a minute ago about what happens when it closes, how you would get to
Yep.
the site, is that, am I correct? Okay. So if you're coming, for instance, from the post office, you're talking about coming up NC 55, you would not be able to turn left on Salem Street.
Post office is up here.
Sorry, post office.
Yeah.
Up there.
Sorry,
yeah.
post office, which direct, okay, yeah, so, so eastbound, yeah, you would take a right in on, First Street and then turn on to Harwood, like Shelley was saying, and then
Okay.
turn in. The other direction, if it does in fact close at South Salem Street, to get in and out, you would go back to First Street and you would have to choose your route from there. And that is assuming that they move forward with that closure, with the NC 55 project, which is not for certain yet, but it's shown 25% plans.
Okay.
We have seen situations where that changes before. We've also seen plenty of situations where that's what goes ahead, so it's hard to tell at this point.
And coming from the west, how would they get to this property?
So from the west, you're saying, or from the heading westbound?
Coming from anywhere on Salem Street, look, westbound from Salem Street, coming back into downtown.
Yeah, so heading southbound?
Heading east.
Yep, so if you're trying to get into the site and you're heading, say for instance, south on Salem, you could take a right on Williams and either turn in at First or turn in down at Upchurch and find your way in via Harwood. Or you could continue down Salem, turn right into West Street, turn right on First Street, and then take a right again onto Harwood Street.
Are there any traffic calming measurements on Upchurch?
There are not,
Stop signs?
we'd have to evaluate that if a neighborhood request comes in. We have done traffic studies,
Right.
in the past over in the Justice Heights Street neighborhood. We didn't recommend any additional traffic calming speed hump measures based on the volumes and speeds we observed at that time. And that was probably just a couple years ago when we
Right.
did those, a year or two ago when we did those studies.
Four-way stop signs.
It would need to meet warrants for an all-way stop for us to recommend, so we are not able to recommend those solely for traffic calming purposes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
But if and when this moves forward, either the 55 rezoning and this, we'll definitely be taking a closer look at it as those things happen. And I'm sorry, Ms. Sherman.
No, that's
We just
okay.
wanted to make sure we got the
Absolutely.
clearest answers out there.
I'm glad you pulled up that map, because I remember
Yeah.
seeing that map, so.
No,
I
it's a good
appreciate
point. I was thinking about maps that have diagrams on them.
So my question is as it relates to, I want to make sure I understand that this is, it is not decided whether it's apartments or condominiums.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. One of the reasons that staff supports the proposal is because it meets housing needs, even though it doesn't meet commercial recommendations. Is that correct?
That's correct. The downtown plan didn't look into how much available commercial we needed. It did look into some ideas of how much could fit within certain areas in a reasonable way. It did, however, look into how much we kind of would theoretically want to add to downtown as far as the residential goes. And that's because we have such a housing shortage in the Triangle. That was really kind of one of the main thrusts of the downtown plan. We do understand that this might be replacing some locations for some commercial in this area, but we feel that the overall housing need is perhaps greater at this point. Plus, as I said earlier, these lots are fairly small and shallow, and the amount of commercial that the consultant was actually thinking might fit in there is probably an optimistic projection. Just based on staff's experience and conversations we've actually had about this particular lot with the owner over the last several years to try to figure out what could fit on here.
And just for clarity's sake, so the land use map and the downtown plan and parking study were just completed a handful of years ago, correct?
The land use map was updated, I think, approximately 5 years ago, and the downtown plan was updated in 2019, so yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm just thinking that as a part of those considerations, the housing, like,
I see where you're coming from on that.
my concern is
so we-
always that we have plans and, the community's engaged in those plans, and when we start deviating from those plans, so I understand we're a little bit away from the 2045, although I will still and completely always refer back to that, but we are just a handful of years away from the downtown plan, in which the housing situation, although has gotten worse, was not, we were in a similar situation, so I'm trying to, as I'm weighing,
Sure.
right?
Completely
The
understand.
concerns, I'm thinking,
I can completely understand that. A couple of points to keep in mind.
please,
When we do these plans, whether it's the town's entire land use map, which is a very large, very complicated, incredibly unwieldy beast of a product to turn out, and I don't know how Shannon does it. It takes a lot of effort from a lot of people, and we have a really hard time looking specifically at every portion of the town. So there's a lot of times that we find information out afterwards. Chapel Ridge North is a good example of that. The Chapel Ridge neighborhoods that we've seen come before us, where we didn't know at the time. And I understand that you had objections to it, and I completely understand those. I'm just saying it's a good example of where we get different information later and look at it more closely later that might influence our recommendations. And perhaps if we had had the time or that information at the time that we were reviewing the plan, we would have made different recommendations. I
actually
understand that
appreciate
you,
brought up Chapel Hill. I actually don't appreciate that you brought up Chapel Hill Ridge.
but
Only,
I will.
only because I actually think that could have been avoided as well. But I bring this up to say, I am incredibly concerned at how this isn't the huge
Yep.
enormity that the town is and is growing to.
Mhm.
It is half a mile from downtown,
Sure.
with frontage, proximity, so close to downtown, with very specific, very careful, very intentional conversation that went in. And so I'm just a little concerned with deviating unless there was some sort of huge overarching reason. And I'm trying to pull and see if that reason exists, and I'm not quite hearing it, but
I'm getting there.
So,
I was
so
gonna
I
let
would,
Diane-
I would like to interject. So one thing that we're not particularly great at with our crystal ball is knowing where markets are gonna go. And there's just not been a whole lot of interest for commercial in this area, and even close by where there is interest, they've been struggling to put, commercial on a property on Hughes Street, just because the size of the lots and the depth of the lots are just not conducive to commercial activity. And so I think that's where, once you get an engineer to start designing the site, figuring out what can fit there, the commercial's just, at least right now, not really viable on these small lots that front both 55 and Salem Street in this particular area near the train tracks. And so I think that's the main thing that's changed. I think that's, commercial is something that I think the property owners along this area had hoped for, but we're not having folks come and ask to do anything along here. The last time anybody proposed commercial from 55 South on Salem Street was a Dollar General probably 15 years ago, and it never came to fruition. So so I would just say it's the market. The market has changed for what people want to build.
is it
I would-
potentially time to update the map to reflect that? I say that because we actually have had some, right? We have Tap Station there. And I wonder what growth is going to come with the expansion of 55, or what additional challenges that may pose. Maybe a discussion for another time, but I think it's a valid one for the community when we have these plans and folks are looking at them. I know there's some similar concerns are going to come up later tonight, where folks rely on these plans as they're considering. And so for them to understand where the town is coming, what the town is thinking, why, I think is really important. So I appreciate your sharing that, and would say we need to talk about having those conversations with the community as well.
I would also just like to make one quick point. When staff is reviewing and when we're working with the consultants that get hired to do these downtown plans, a lot of what we're seeing are the consultants' ideas of things, because we don't have the time to go back through and redo their market analysis or even make sure that we've completely checked all the boxes to finally critique that. But honestly, it's partly due to the topography of the town and the fact that people, despite it being a downtown area, still drive a lot. So any commercial that's gonna go on this section is going to need a significant amount of parking, and it might be in excess of what we're seeing for this particular development. That is my only thought. We find that parking a site is almost always the most difficult thing to do, particularly on small lots, and even after reducing our parking minimums. So,
Appreciate your feedback.
if there are no other questions, I'll let the applicant come up and speak.
Any other questions for Shelley? All right.
Hello, everybody.
Evening.
Good evening.
My name is, excuse me. My name is Patrick Kiernan with Jones and Knosson Engineering, 221 North Salem Street, and I am representing the applicant Charm City Developers for this PUD. Thank you, Shelley. That was very thorough. All the questions and answers were very thorough. Kind of took a lot of the words out of my mouth. I don't need to rehash a lot of what she said. So I think I'll just touch on a couple things that didn't get brought up, and a lot of them kind of relate to some of the questions that were asked. Shelley mentioned the Apex Downtown Plan. Another thing that we were kind of directed towards attending was the TOD workshop, which was Transit Oriented Development Workshop in Apex, and that's to do with a future rail line, passenger rail line that'll be coming through Apex, collaboration between NCDOT and Virginia DOT that'll connect Richmond and I believe Sanford, North Carolina, and that'll stop through Apex. So it kind of plays in with the downtown plan of bringing more higher density residential to the walk. We're within that 10-minute walkability range, that half-mile radius. So we feel like we're following the town's lead on their desire to bring more housing into this area. So as that relates to the land use map, really the one thing that didn't get mentioned, all Shelley and Diane's points are spot on. The biggest thing for us kind of relates back to the access question. You know, how are you getting to this site from the east, west, north, south? It's a challenge. I mean, Harwood Street, you know, we're kind of in this time period right now before the Apex train station, multimodal, you know, train bus station has been even laid out and decided on where it'll be. And then also we're, you know, at least a few years away from the NCDOT road widening project on 55. So whereas right now Harwood Street is open to South Salem Street, in the future it will not be. That's our understanding anyway, is that that would be cut off from, at least from passenger cars. So with that said, you know, obviously circulation through either through the neighborhood or out First Street, Harwood to First, or, you know, whichever way residents decide is their, you know, preferred route to go, that'll be the way they figure it out. When you think about retail, that kind of gets tricky. You know, if people see a retail building but they don't know how to get to it. You know, if there's no frontage on South Salem and they're expected to know that they have to turn on 55, turn left on First, turn left on Harwood just to kind of get to the one entrance. The size of the parcel didn't have enough frontage for, you know, pushing another entrance on South Salem. That probably would have been pretty key in opening up the potential for commercial. So with all those factors and then just our desire to bring more residential, we took this plan to town staff and, you know, from what the feedback we received, it was fully supported. So that's really the reason that, you know, even though the land use map has that commercial aspect, we felt that the apartment or condo, you know, residential style building was more appropriate for this location. Totally side note, but my client does actually own some land on the opposite side of South Salem, on the south side, and that is another project that we are kind of starting to play around with the land planning, and retail on that side is something that we are definitely aiming for. So, you know, if the market allows for doing that, you know, we would like to provide. You know, it's just one of those things you gotta kind of get into the weeds of the site-specific details and everything. Let's see, Mr. Akers, you mentioned the hardscape along South Salem. It's a great question. You know, something that we are definitely concerned with. You know, how does that look? I think the urban style hardscape is sort of the direction that we're headed. If you looked at the rendering, it kind of has some landscaping built into the front facade. Whether or not it looks exactly like that remains to be seen. Obviously, building designs aren't finalized yet. We need to kind of really finalize the building depth and, you know, how far back from South Salem, you know, the dedicated right-of-way we actually are and what we can fit there. I know we're going with a 0-foot setback for now, and that's just to kind of promote as much flexibility as possible. But, you know, we definitely are proposing this as an urban style downtown, you know, type apartment that you would see in downtown Raleigh or downtown Cary. You know, not just a kind of suburbia apartment building where you've got just 5-foot sidewalks and your normal landscape buffers and everything kind of speckled throughout. Let's see, it was brought up the hope that we will be able to make a connection to the West Street Park behind us. That was something that we reached out to Parks and Rec Department about, you know. So originally, when we had the first neighborhood meeting, we did not own the parcel that is adjacent to the town park. That was something that got added on later on. And the second that parcel got added, the first thing we did was reach out to the Parks and Rec and said, if the topography works out, if, you know, the site plan works out, would there be an opportunity to provide a connection to the town park? And it was, you know, pretty widely encouraged. So like Shelley said, it's not put in as a zoning condition per se, just because, you know, there's a lot of factors that we haven't gotten into. But we would consider that a strong amenity, you know, for our residential building if that's something that we can provide. The other thing that connecting to the town park has actually enabled us to do, and this is pretty technical, but there is a decades-old stormwater issue, public stormwater issue that comes from South Salem Street. And it actually ties right into the reason that we are proposing to abandon this public storm drainage easement that cuts that corner. There's just some funky stuff that was going on way back when this was all built, but there's essentially a storm drain junction box somewhere right where this cursor is that sort of just has a public pipe without an easement on it that just outlets kind of into the middle of our site, the topo of which did not work from a infrastructure standpoint. So the pipe just outlets into a hole. It doesn't go anywhere. So that hole fills up with water. Eventually it trickles on, but it's not a pond that's being treated. It's just essentially it's a cesspool. And there was really no way to resolve that just based on the elevations of all the different storm drainage that was out there. So now that we've added this parcel that backs up to the town park, we have done some preliminary designs that prove that this should work. But there is more Town of Apex public storm drainage on the park property that we should be able to realign outside of the road. So this wouldn't be, interfering with traffic when this is all being done. Whether it's within the right-of-way or in the right-of-way dedication, rerouting that storm drainage around the building and basically piping it to the town park, and that would kind of keep everything in an enclosed system, so we don't get into just outletting it into a nasty hole. The bus stop, while that is not been decided quite yet, we are definitely looking at that kind of that southern corner. As far from the intersection as we can get it. That would be sort of our preferred location there. Shelley mentioned the affordability component. And I think that pretty much covers it. Like I said, all the questions and answers really kind of went down my list of all the things I wanted to talk about. Access is a difficult, component of the site, but, we're doing the best with what we have here. So kind of juggling all the future plans of DOT and the Town of Apex, we've designed this in such a way that we feel there's flexibility in the future for when those plans come through. So we're not handcuffing DOT, for example. At one point there was a concept that showed like a cul-de-sac turnaround on Harwood and closing off Harwood Street, and then later on there was a possibility that maybe Harwood would remain open, but with a gate that might allow for bus traffic. If the bus station was on this road, could buses use that as a route of circulation, but not passenger cars? So there are some unknowns. We are kind of, like I said, just setting this up with as much flexibility as we can. So.
Quick question for you.
Sure, yeah.
About the bus stop. You're looking at the southern edge of the property. How does that potentially interact with the church driveway and parking lot?
That's a great question. I guess just looking at the existing conditions on this sheet here, so this kind of trapezoidal property here, there's a little driveway apron that was for an old house that's no longer here on this property that kind of came up there. So there's already a little bit of a pad right there. So, that's sort of the ideal location for this. You can see the church driveway on this corner over here. If we get into the design and there's any reason that becomes a conflict, we can certainly look at shifting that down. I don't think since that will be just off the curb and inside the right-of-way, I don't think it makes a huge difference, where along this frontage that bus stop goes. We would prefer.
I can start. So I like this project, and I think it brings more residents to the area. Footsteps bring traffic, which brings more commercial. It's sort of, that general direction. From what I've talked to with my neighbors throughout that part of Justice Heights, everyone is in general for it because they realize that, that neighborhood in general, we like the affordability aspect that this brings, and we like that it'll bring more people to an area that they can walk to things, take a bus, because there is that Apex connector that actually stops up at Salem and 55. So there's a lot of pros to this project, and I do like what they're trying to do here, barring the transit issues, which I kind of realize it's kind of unpredictable, with what the projects are going to be happening in the future. So,
Is that a motion, Daniel?
a motion to approve.
I would second that. motion.
All right, so I have a motion from Daniel.
And before we vote, I just want to say, I think I've sort of expressed my concerns in deference to my neighbors. I'm gonna vote in favor. Thank you for all of your feedback and discussion with the neighbors. I'm sad that folks are not in attendance. I know that's a challenge, but I do want to name that I have real concerns. Those I've already voiced, and this is a slippery slope. I think the likelihood, although I understand that the applicant is considering another place, I think the likelihood now of having additional commercial will be all but gone. And considering, again, all the, the intentionality that went into what this should look like, I think that's very, very unfortunate and is going to change the potential of what was envisioned for this area. I actually am not pleased that we were compared to Cary and Raleigh, because those homes are not affordable. So I'm saddened and disappointed that this is sort of where we are, and hope to work with the town a little bit more on how we communicate about and what our plans look like, because again, this was just a couple of years ago. We shouldn't be in this place drastically changing it. But I will absolutely defer to my neighbors and vote in favor.
All right. So we have a motion from Daniel and a second from Melissa, is that right? All right, so all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing?
No.
All right, this passes unanimously.
So I think there was a no vote.
No? There was one? I apologize. There was one dissension. Tim, you dissented?
I'll write it up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. All right, so Shannon, we're gonna discuss a public hearing and possible motion regarding amendments to the thoroughfare on Collector Street, but I believe we need to make a motion to have Mr. Akers recused.
And this is likely to be on the longer side, just to let you know you're an hour in. I don't know if you need to consider a break or not before I get into this.
Are we okay to proceed?
Can we take a break?
You good?
Is it be brief? You wanna take a break? All right, so take a 5-minute recess then? All right, so let's,
Sounds good.
Do I need to make a motion?
yes.
Can I make a motion to take a 5-minute break?
All right, we have a motion from Sarah. Do we have a second?
Second.
And a second from Tina. All in favor of a 5-minute break, say aye.
Aye.
Any dissent? All right, so we will reconvene here at 5:35.
and NC 540. They are associated with the area known as Viridia. So if you look at the screen, Viridia takes up most of the land area in that kind of triangle of major roadways. The amendments today are focused on the East Village, so the side closer to NC 55. And these amendments are associated with the non-residential master subdivision plan for Viridia. The zoning is already in place, and it is a sustainable development conditional zoning. It's been in place since 2011. It's the only zoning of that type in Apex. So one of the things that staff and the Viridia team considered with this kind of package of amendments is the Sustainable Development Plan. And there's two aspects of that plan that I wanted to point out in particular. The first is to create a framework for the next generation version of the Research Triangle Park that is a vibrant, urban, mixed-use, transit-oriented community. And the second is to establish a full-service, pedestrian-friendly, transit-oriented community that respects and encourages wellness and safety. So transit-oriented development and pedestrian-friendly development are key results that they're looking for with this Viridia development. You are not voting to approve or deny what you're seeing on the screen now, but it is a concept for Viridia, and it was helpful to staff to have this concept as we considered the proposed amendments to the transportation plan. So we wanted to share it with you all this evening as well. So just a brief orientation, and the Viridia team will probably share this in a bit more detail during their presentation. You can see that the part we're not discussing today, the West Village section of Viridia, is where more of the intense development is expected, more of the non-residential office, some industrial and commercial service uses. The East Village area, if you just kind of get a sense of the overall plan, closest to the Technology Drive, NC 55 East Williams intersection is where they're planning a retail center and more of their non-residential uses. This thoroughfare also has institutional use planned along the south side. And then if you look at Jesse Drive, there's another future institutional use planned on the north side. This is future Jesse Drive in this location. More of the higher density residential is planned for this area. And then up where there's a lot of stream buffers and environmental constraints, a little bit lower density residential. So that just gives you an overall concept of what we're talking about. So there's proposed amendments to all three maps that make up our transportation plan. We'll start with the Thoroughfare and Collector Street plan map. And the way we've organized these, I'll start with number 1, and we'll just work our way around in a counterclockwise direction. So the first proposed amendment is to change the minor collectors that are X'd out here to major collectors, and also to realign those. This intersection in this location, which is the extension of Pristine Water Drive next to Aqualine, which has already been approved, is likely to be the only full movement intersection along East William Street initially, before more of the roadway network is built out. So this access point becomes very important for Viridia. And the flow of traffic led us to recommend, sorry, my mouse keeps disappearing on me, major collector streets instead of minor collector streets. That also corresponds with the recent amendment to upgrade this to a major collector adjacent to Aqualine. The major collector streets allow slightly wider pavement, higher design speed, and no access by single-family residential driveways. The change in the alignment mainly corresponds with the field-specific information the Veridia team has at this point and their planned pattern of development. Moving counterclockwise, the next amendment is to realign these future 4-lane median divided thoroughfares. That includes future Jesse Drive, which is a more substantial realignment, and then what we're calling Thoroughfare A, which is really an extension of where you know Technology Drive to be now. We spent quite a lot of time, staff and the Veridia team, talking about Jesse Drive in particular, since this is intended to be a transit-oriented development. The proposed shift adjacent to existing development doesn't allow for TOD on both sides of the roadway in this location. To address that concern, Veridia committed to adding a linear park along the south side of Jesse Drive. And they've also committed to a grade-separated pedestrian crossing. In addition, kind of going back to the concept, you can see that more of the TOD development would be concentrated on the ends of Jesse Drive and not that section in the middle. In this location, amendment number 3, the proposal is to realign and change this minor collector street from a minor to a major. This would allow for a full movement intersection in this location, separating it from the major intersection here. And that's also consistent with the proposed plans that NCDOT is working on for intersection improvements there. And then the minor collector street in this location would be removed. Amendment number 5, there's a very slight shift to the minor collector street that would allow this to line up at this intersection. Amendment number 6 is to add a future local connector between Thoroughfare A and this major collector street. Local connectors are more like residential streets. In this particular case, it's a retail connection through their planned development. We really only add these to the plan where we see connectivity is critical. And that's the case here. This roadway is proposed for a future local bus route and would also provide that cross-access between uses adjacent to thoroughfares, which we always strive for. Adjacent to a future super street where access will be restricted, it's especially important. Amendment number 7 is to remove the future minor collectors that are shown here and would really be redundant with the proposed major collectors as part of the Veridia network. I'm going to talk about Amendment 8 and 10 together, and we'll come back to 9. 8 and 10 together were really staff recommendations. And again, those are intended to set up the network to provide that future access across parcels adjacent to NC 55. This would not be fully built as part of Veridia, and it would impact other parcels. So it would most likely occur only with redevelopment, potentially far down the road. Amendment number 9 is to change this roadway from a major collector to a minor, and that corresponds with the upgrade of this roadway just further north. That would serve as the primary access point. And then finally on this map, they're also proposing to add 3 future roundabouts, which do serve a traffic calming purpose and are consistent with the goals of this being a safe, pedestrian-oriented, transit-oriented project. We'll go to the transit plan map amendments next. So currently, our transit plan map only shows future local bus route, which is this blue and white line along Viridia Parkway, Jesse Drive, and then East William Street. The amendment with all these X's is really just to show that we need to shift the local bus route on the new Jesse Drive alignment. The other changes are to add a proposed future local bus route along sections of Thoroughfare A, that local connector that I mentioned, along this major collector street, and up along this major collector, which would provide a needed full movement intersection for bus access and potentially serve the Aqualine multifamily and commercial development. So we're really adding future local bus routes with the proposed amendments. And then finally, for the bicycle and pedestrian system plan map, what I'm showing are really enhancements over and above what we've planned on. And that is, again, in keeping with the goals of this project. So currently, if you just think about the Viridia area as a whole, our bike ped system plan map shows bike lanes along Viridia Parkway. It shows the Big Branch Greenway. It shows side path along both sides of Jesse Drive, and then both sides of East William Street north of Jesse Drive. So the proposed additions are side path along this new major collector street, extending future Big Branch Greenway to meet up with the realigned Jesse Drive, adding a proposed grade separated crossing in approximately this location. We talked about that as being one of the elements of supporting the transit-oriented development. What you're not seeing is a commitment that's included in the environmental enhancement plan to add linear park along sections of Jesse Drive and sections of Thoroughfare A. That makes this grade separated crossing helpful as well, and that would also provide access to where the future Wake Tech campus is proposed. So a second grade separated pedestrian crossing, extension of side path along East William Street, so extending that further south, adding another side path along this major collector street to really provide a great connection throughout the development. And then finally, just realigning what we're showing along Jesse Drive. In terms of programmed projects, state and local projects, the only programmed project is what's planned at Technology Drive in 55. NCDOT has a public meeting for that project this week, and what Viridia is showing is consistent with their preliminary plans. The Parks Rec Cultural Resources Advisory Commission met to consider the proposed bike ped map amendments on January 25th, and they unanimously recommended approval. The transit map recommendations were not ready for our quarterly Transit Advisory Committee meeting, but we did present the concept, and the committee was supportive. And then staff across many departments have been working hard on this, including transportation, infrastructure and development, fire, police, Parks Rec and Cultural Resources, and planning, and we can recommend approval. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Shannon. Any questions for Shannon?
How long has this taken you or the team to, just out of curiosity?
I think we started meeting in November for this project. We started with a charrette So, you know, I think it was a half-day meeting, multiple departments, the Viridia team, and then there've been iterations since then.
November, last.
I believe so, yeah, I believe it was
But
November.
this portion of the project, not Viridia as a
Oh,
whole.
yeah, that's been much longer. Yep.
Shannon, the institutional down by Data General, the closest part of 55, is that where Wake Tech is planning on going?
That's the current proposal. I don't know how
Okay.
final that
I mean,
is.
that's what you, sorry, when you're talking about institution, that was earmarked as possible, the Wake Tech location, versus another one being maybe a high school or something like that.
Yeah, the proposal is Wake Tech, and I know the team plans to present, so they might address that more specifically.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Did the team want to speak?
We have a short presentation here this evening. Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, my name is Joe Graziosi. I'm an executive vice president with RXR Realty out of New York City. One of the board members asked, how long does this take? And for us, Rebecca and my colleague, who I'll introduce in a second, have been coming back and forth to Apex now for just about 16 months to really look at this Viridia project. You heard earlier a project this evening that was a 1 acre project. This is 1,000 acres. So obviously there's a bit more here than meets the eye. But I wanted to take this opportunity this evening, Mr. Chairman and board members, really to introduce our company, because we've never had the pleasure of being in front of you. And I will say, at the risk of speaking out of line, you have an incredible staff here, and you should be extremely grateful. And they've never made one step of this hard, but they've always taken a hard line on what they want at the end of the day. So we do appreciate that. And coming from where we come from, sometimes it doesn't work that way. So if you could, Rebecca. So just a little bit about RXR. So we're a leading national developer. You may know us if you've walked down the streets of New York City. You'll see that we own 30 million square feet of many of the iconic buildings in New York City, from our main headquarters at 75 Rockefeller Plaza to the Helmsley building to Starrett Lehigh, and I can go on. And that was our core. That was our core business. But our business is really made up of sort of 6 sectors, right? One is we are very strongly in the infrastructure business, and there's a photograph on this deck that shows our project. We're building the JetBlue terminal at JFK, just to get a sense of a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project. Obviously, our office portfolio, which speaks for itself. Logistics, I'm proud to say that the photograph on the left, we just opened a 1 million square foot facility with Amazon that my colleague Rebecca was totally responsible for. Down in Maspeth, Queens, multi-story, postage stamp project at the end of the day. We didn't have this sort of property that we have here. Yes, we are in the residential business, but we are not in the multifamily business, not in the single-family business. We're in the multifamily business, both from rentals as well as condominiums. The picture here is one of the Ritz-Carltons that I've built over the years in our portfolio. Again, mixed use. You guys use the term TOD here. We're the master developer in many, many TODs in and around the New York City region, the Long Island region, where we're literally building thousands of multifamily units as well as mixed use within that same community in and around rail spurs. So we're very familiar with how that works. And then lastly, just general master planning, which is exactly what we're doing here. I just want to talk a little bit about our commitment to our communities. And what you'll find about us is that we work, sometimes an overused term, public-private partnerships, but our success, and I've been here since 2007, our success in the communities we work with is working with the people in the community, understanding the needs of the community, pivoting when we have to with the community to make sure that we're aligned at the end of the day. And sometimes we're not always aligned. Sometimes we'll be a little further on the left and the community further on the right, but we work hard to make sure we listen. We listen and we understand what's best for the community. and how we advance projects. You'll see some pictures down here of, different things that we do in communities, whether it's, food banks, or whether it's giving awards out, or whether it's sponsoring marathons. And it's not just in our region, it's outside of the region as we are a national player. And we put a lot of effort in our volunteer programs, as well as an extensive sustainability programs for all of our buildings and all of our future developments. Just a little taste of 3 projects that I decided I would put in front of you all this evening, just to give you a subtle little bit of a metric. The first one is called Garvey's Point, and that's in Glen Cove, that's in Long Island, New York. That was the home of a Superfund site, a 56-acre Superfund site that required 35 municipal and governmental jurisdictions to get together and figure out how it could ever be built on. I'm proud to say that over $700 million have been invested in that site. And what you'll see in these stats is we're very focused on job creation, both permanent as well as construction jobs. And we're also very focused on the awarding of business to local businesses, as well as MWBE and BE. And that's something that we take very seriously, and it comes down from the top of the ownership. We talked a little bit about the logistics facility, and then obviously our commercial, I used 5 Times Square, which was just a big renovation that we had done, $500 million. So really what I want to say is, when you look at our national footprint and you look at our company, we have the scale and we have the size to complete this project. I often say in this business, and I've got enough gray hair to say it, I've done it a few, maybe 40 years, it's better to be second, I think in our case we're third, than be first. So I think, this has been around since 2011. And I think, in that past 16 months that we've spent and working with the staff here, we've looked at this holistically, not just a pod over here and a pod over there, but holistically to really understand how we can bring the most value to it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of RXR. I know we're limited in time. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rebecca DeLoya, who's also an executive vice president on the development side, and what I like to say is my partner in this project. So, excuse me. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Good evening now, I think it might be. My name is Rebecca DeLoya. I'm a EVP with RXR and the development team, and it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Shannon, rightfully asked to include this master plan in her presentation in order to give the context for the very specific amendments to the transportation comp plan. And I think she did a great job of pointing out some of the aspects of it. I just want to drill down with slight more detail on the plan and to give the context around those the comp plan amendments that we're talking about tonight, as well as there will be an item in the new business section about the environmental enhancement plan, and we will be in the audience, obviously, to answer any questions when that comes up. As far as the plan goes, those 2 items before you tonight were developed with a long-term view, and as Joe mentioned, our business is very much about placemaking and large-scale master development. And one of the things that's really exciting to us as a developer who has worked primarily in the metropolitan New York region, and then, as we've mentioned, expanding nationally, a site like this has an opportunity to really placemake and to build on the bones of Apex, which is an amazing town. You have, just listening to the dialogue of some of the other items here tonight, a real passion for creating an active and sustainable downtown. And for the Viridius site and across those 1,000 acres and the SD zoning that is in place, there's an opportunity for some of this more urban density and concentration of a diverse set of uses and housing and real live, work, play opportunity on the sort of barbells of the site with my cursor. I'll show the East Village, which Shannon was speaking to here, is while it'll have a large component of multifamily, it does have a significant amount of commercial and retail opportunity, and as well as open spaces, town centers, pedestrian streets, places geared towards that TOD development that we as a company seek out and try to develop across the country. I think the while we started to talk a little bit about the amendments to the long-range mass transit plans for the region, those will be concentrated, and we've made accommodations for that on the in the West Village portion of the site, which is more of a phase 2. I won't take much more of your time. I just, I think to speak before you, and I know that you understand as well as we do, that great placemaking really takes detailed, deliberate effort. It doesn't happen by accident. And so when we look at this plan and we think about things like the transportation comp plan that the town has already taken initiative to develop, we want to build into that long-range planning and think about every step and decision that we make with the project. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be before you. I think we'll take questions, right?
If there is questions, we'd love to, but I'd like to address the gentleman's question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. You had asked about Wake Tech. So we are under contract with Wake Tech, Dr. Rawls and his team. In fact, we were just talking to them the other day, and they'll be closed. We'll be closing most likely by next Friday on the property. We're actually in escrow right now, so we're just starting to tie in a few things, and then they'll be closing right after us. And I would say, you know, to the planning board and to people from the town, it was one of the first meetings we had when we came to town 2 Christmases ago. That's how long it's been, was with Wake Tech, because we got word that they were interested in combining some facilities, and we knew, you know, sort of how important that would be to this overall development. So we're really excited about that, and we see them as a long-term partner. And in working with the team here, especially on the transportation side, we're looking at ways to get to our commercial area from the university in a safe manner, et cetera. So a lot of that's in play.
Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant?
One. Mostly it's because my eyes are terrible. But the technology drive, where it meets up with 55, as part of this process, I guess it'll shift up, or
So
I guess it'll be west.
this is, we're talking about this area here. This is the area of future HL 0007 reconfiguration of Technology Drive. So the intersection here will be modified, and I know Russell can speak to this probably better than I can. But eventually, Technology Drive will be relocated from its current spot to this sort of, you come down Thoroughfare A and enter in here.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It was just hard because the arrow kind of like, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I'll open the public comment section. Do we have anybody in the public that look to speak? I only have the 2 names that presented, so I'm guessing that's a no. I will close the public comment section, bring it back to the board for discussion and motions.
Can't say no to infrastructure.
Sure can't. I have a hard time saying no to bike paths and things as well, so.
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All right, so I have a motion from Sarah and a second from Tina. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, so that passes unanimously. And I guess we need to make a motion to bring Mr. Akers back, is that right?
Make a motion to bring Mr. Akers back.
All right, a motion from Melissa, and do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Daniel. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Welcome back, Ryan.
Good to be back. Good to be back.
All right, Shannon, you're going to talk with us about the long-range planning for the Apex Gateway Phase 2?
Yes, and I'll keep this one a little shorter. We have a proposed land use map amendment associated with Apex Gateway Phase 2. This is in the vicinity of US 64. It's both on the north and south side, so adjacent to 751 and New Hill Road. This is also adjacent to the recent land use map amendment for Gateway Phase 1 to add industrial employment. The proposed amendment on the north side of US 64 is to add the industrial employment land use designation. This is an addition because we do not currently show this on our land use map. It's outside of our planning jurisdiction. And then the second proposed amendment is to add the commercial services and industrial employment designation on the south side of 64, adjacent to New Hill Road. These land use map amendments are consistent with the employment center currently shown on the Chatham County Future Land Use and Conservation Plan. These, I meant to say, these are associated with the next item on your agenda, the rezoning case. So as is typical, we would recommend that you have the public hearing for the land use map amendment, but hold on your vote until after the next item. Planning staff recommends adoption of the proposed amendments, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Shannon? Okay, want to speak? We have an applicant? Staff's the applicant, all right. So we're gonna hold on our motion on voting. Do we have any other questions or discussion we wanna have?
We just need to open the public hearing.
All right, thank you. I will open the public hearing, and I have 3 names here. Mr. Seagroves, Tim Seagroves. Come on up.
My name's Tim Seagroves. How are you?
Good evening.
I'm trying to operate this. And Brent's here with me today, and we're the landowners. I'm the landowner at this location right here, which is off Laurel Springs Way. I guess I'm here for this mini community tonight, trying to ask a few questions. Well, Brent's got a buffer in his plan that's showing that we have seen. And the one question that I had is the buffer going to be required for him to plant and maintain? And, you know, he's got a house that's in the buffer zone. So I don't know if you can answer that question tonight or not, but the community has asked me to ask those questions. And also there's another buffer over on this side right here. So we're curious about those 2 buffer areas, see if they're gonna be installed. And Brent's got a special situation with his 2 lots. He's got this lot, which is a residential lot. It's gonna get rezoned in this lot. So that's one question I had. Another question I have is I got a well that's about right there at the tip of that arrow. So how many feet off the property line? I know it's about 15 feet now, but will commercial development affect that well right now? So I don't know if you have any answers to those questions.
Very good questions, Mr. Seagrove. Staff have any comments?
So those are questions for the rezoning. This is just the land use portion of the public hearing, so we'll defer to after Amanda gives her presentation.
All right,
Noted.
thank you. So we'll get to those, Mr. Seagrove.
Do what now?
We will get to your questions.
Okay,
We've
thank you.
noted them. Thank you. Walker Graham.
That's your Skinner. I'm the applicant, so
All
I was
right.
gonna wait to speak.
You'll hold off, all right. Suzanne Kennedy Stoskoff.
I think it would be better to wait till after the next discussion.
All right. These are all together on the gateway. So then, Diane, do we move forward to item number 5?
You would close the public hearing and just hold over the vote.
So we'll close the public hearing for the Apex Gateway Phase 2 Land Use Amendment. And Amanda, you're gonna talk to us now about public hearing, possible motion rezoning 22 CZ 26, the Apex Gateway.
Yes, so this is the rezoning that's associated with the land use map amendment that Shannon just presented. Again, this rezoning is located in west of Apex's jurisdiction on the north and south sides of 64, along 751 and New Hill Road, New Hill Olive Chapel Road, fully within Chatham County. The properties are a combination of zonings within Chatham County, mostly residential, but there is an office and institution zoning, as well as an industrial zoning on the parcel here. The surrounding zoning is generally residential, where you see the pink, but there are this shade of pink, but there is regional business, community business, and general business zoning to the west of this parcel. With to the east is light industrial conditional zoning, and then you have planning and development. This is the Deer Creek community. The proposed zoning is light industrial conditional zoning, and if the 2045 land use map is approved as recommended by staff, the rezoning will be consistent with those land use classifications. The rezoning altogether is approximately 243 acres. The properties are all located, well, I'm going over the location. 9 of the parcels contain homes, with all but 1 being on the east side of 751, but most of the parcels are wooded, with the exception, let me go back to the aerial, of this parcel known as the Cant Hook parcel, which has primarily been cleared. It's been in forestry use. So as you can see, it's primarily cleared already, with the exception of the riparian buffers and some portions to the south. The applicant conducted their neighborhood meeting on October 27th of last year, and you have that report. There are a list of 40 uses, and I'm not going to go through all of those. And before I do that, I did want to say that staff has also, as part of this process, met with Chatham County Planning, Economic Development, and Administration while coordinating rezoning further into Chatham County. So there are several uses listed, and many of these uses have use conditions and restrictions placed on them. The uses are a mix of industrial as well as retail and office uses, intended to allow for services both for the people who will be working in this industrial area or this business area, as well as the people who live in the general vicinity as well. And this is consistent with the employment center description in the Chatham County Land Use Plan, which calls for a mix of industrial, retail, and supportive uses at this future interchange. To highlight some of the restrictions on the uses, you'll note this dark gray area. North is to your right. In this gray area, there is a restriction on the use manufacturing and processing. This is approximately a 500-foot buffer from the northern property boundary. So no manufacturing and processing is allowed, nor laboratory industrial research. So those 2 uses are prohibited within that dark gray area. There are limitations on the use, building supplies, wholesale, and there are several uses that are restricted from this yellow area south of 64 and west of New Hill Road, which it's a 500-foot area, and the restrictions prohibit the manufacturing and processing minor. No manufacturing and processing, the normal one, is allowed south of 64. Further restricted from the yellow areas, glass sales, brewery, distillery, and then there are size limitations placed on the uses warehousing general, warehousing fulfillment center, and wholesaling distribution center. They are to be restricted to no more than 95,000 square feet each, and not allowed within this yellow area as well. So the intent is that as you get closer to the Deer Creek community, this area in pink would be restricted to service uses such as restaurant, medical office, office professional, retail sales general, pet services, and there's a few others. To highlight, getting into some of the environmental conditions, beyond the UDO required buffer, which is generally shown in green, there is an additional tree-safe area to the north, which would be an approximate 100-foot buffer from the northern boundary of the area to be to be rezoned. North of 64, the applicant is proposing to replant any trees 18 inches in diameter that are removed with development, and south of 64, the threshold would be 24-inch caliper trees would be that are removed with development would be replaced with a 1.5-inch caliper tree. The applicant is committed to the treating the 25-year storm with development and other green stormwater infrastructure measures. Additionally, the project is proposing to preserve an additional 30 feet of buffer along intermittent and perennial streams north of 64. The project also proposes to install light timers or other smart lighting technology on at least 50% of fixtures in the parking lots. There's also a commitment for an outdoor activated open space outdoor amenity along a proposed multi-use path, which is generally shown in green here. There's also commitments for several architectural conditions that are typical what we see for commercial and industrial and are consistent with those that were approved for Apex Gateway Phase 1. For transportation conditions, I'm just going to leave it on this one. The applicant is proposing to dedicate the right-of-way anticipated for the future interchange at this location. So with Phase 1, this area in red here was committed to be dedicated, and within this rezoning, there would be additional area to accommodate alternative 1 that NCDOT is what NCDOT has determined to be alternative 1 at this time. There's also a commitment, as you can see in blue, for a future major collector street on a 60-foot right-of-way. This connects in with the commitment for public right-of-way within Apex Gateway Phase 1. And this is to assist with the redevelopment of these properties and to eliminate or reduce, the number of curb cuts on 751. There's also commitments for multi-use paths and sidewalks, including along both sides of the road. On the west side of 751 is a 5-foot setback, 5-foot sidewalk, The development is also committing to construct and designate 10 park and ride spaces for public use within Apex Gateway Phase 2. One of the elements identified in the Chatham County Land Use Plan was an opportunity for a park and ride location, as this is, at a major intersection away from the core of development, and so it would allow for people to commute together, to meet up and ride in together if they so choose. The EAB met on this on October 20th and provided several suggestions. The applicant has offered many of those or modifications to some of those. Since your report, you received your report, the applicant has added 2 additional environmental conditions that were requested by the EAB. One was there shall be no tree clearing within the riparian buffer zones with the exception of required Town of Apex utilities and public street connections. And any required public road crossing within a riparian buffer shall be narrowed to the greatest extent possible, subject to Town of Apex design requirements and staff approval in order to limit environmental impacts. Planning staff is recommending approval of this rezoning with the conditions as offered by the applicant, including the new ones added today. If amended as proposed by staff, the 2045 land use map would be consistent with the proposed rezoning. The rezoning is consistent with those, also consistent with the Chatham County Comprehensive Plan, which designates this area as an employment center. Approval of the rezoning is reasonable and in the public interest because the proposed light industrial conditional zoning district will allow for non-residential development in an area that anticipates non-residential uses while ensuring the more intense uses are set back from predominantly residential areas. Provides dedication of right-of-way for the future interchange plan for US 64 and 751, and commits to construction of additional public streets, provides conditions to mitigate the environmental impact above town standards, and will allow development that will generate jobs and increase the tax base. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions for Amanda? Amanda, the DOT alternative 1, can you go into that as to what that would look like?
So generally, the bounds of the right-of-way are within the area hatched in red here. There are alternatives that are still being evaluated by NCDOT. And we're looking at a project that I think is about 8 to 10 years out for right-of-way acquisition, if I remember correctly, ish. Could be longer.
Moved a little closer.
Oh, okay, all right, good, so that's on the good side. I was worried she was gonna say moved out further, but, so this would accommodate, alternative one. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and we did receive public hearing emails that have been forwarded to you, from these 3 individuals.
Mr. Graham, would you like to speak?
Good evening, Chair Skinner, members of the board. My name is Walker Gorham. I'm the Triangle Market Leader for Beacon Partners and serve as the Development Manager for Apex Gateway. I'm joined by our managing partners at Beacon, Pete Lash and John Morris, as well as our civil engineering consultants from Kimley Horn. Appreciate the overview that Amanda provided, and ultimately just wanted to highlight principally some of the refinement to the concept plan that's been born out of the collaboration with Chatham County. As I think the planning board is aware, we had a joint planning session with both the county planning staff as well as the town, and then have had 3 rounds of subsequent submissions and refinement with the town's planning staff, and then follow-on meetings with Chatham County's economic development team, as well as with Joanna and the team at the town of Apex. And as you can fully appreciate, not all direction is fully aligned, but we have made a sincere effort to refine the plan over the last 5 months. And again, just wanted to highlight a couple of the key themes. First and foremost was conformance to the county's comprehensive plan. And I think the principal refinement there was the exclusive dedication of retail and office acreage. So principally trying to enhance the mixed-use programming, namely along US 64, the frontage there, as well as on 751. And so we have subsequently committed to dedicating over 20 acres of frontage exclusively for retail and office. And the spirit and the intent there, as Amanda highlighted, is to provide in effect, additional buffering such that we have a 500+ foot setback from our industrial uses on site, and those really are in isolated regions within the project on the north side of 64, and that we are reprogramming the southern acreage south of 64, 85+ acres to be oriented towards neighborhood retail. We have a 12-acre parcel that sits on the southeast corner that has been fully restricted to only retail, low-density office uses, as well as that 500-foot, the inclusion of the 500-foot buffer off of the center line of New Hill Road and Olive Chapel roads. Again, the intent there is to just limit the intensity of commercial traffic going south of 64. And then I did also want to just highlight the public infrastructure commitment. You know, a big part of the lift here is going to be over $6 million worth of regional utility infrastructure, namely the extension of water and sewer, but also 2 regional pump stations to provide sanitary sewer throughout the service area. We've also committed to size those to provide regional capacity. So above and beyond just the capacity requirements for this project, in the event that there is a need for future capacity along the employment center corridor going forward. We've also committed to the construction of over 2,500 linear feet of major collector road that runs east-west along the north side of the project, and then committed to the construction and public access of over a half-mile of multi-use pedestrian trails that will run along a 1-mile loop on the north side of 64 through the project area that, again, we hope will activate the project for our customers and tenants, but also be available for public use for the adjacent residents. And then I think notably consistent feedback from planning staff and planning board members was our commitment to address and go above and beyond town requirements for stormwater infrastructure and for our environmental and sustainability initiatives. And we've taken that feedback seriously and subsequently committed to constructing 2+ acres of natural wetlands on the north side of 64 above town requirements. We've increased our stormwater attenuation to the 25-year standard above town requirements. And then we have implemented several green stormwater initiatives, namely commitment for permeable pavers on site north of 64, as well as the inclusion of cisterns and then bioretention areas around any of the buildings and parking fields to the north of 64. And then lastly, this was something that Amanda didn't highlight, but came as a result of a recommendation from several council members. We did meet with the executive leadership for the Triangle Land Conservancy following our phase 1 approval, and we have collaborated with them, and we're going to be making a $200,000 commitment that is earmarked for expanding the riparian buffer on the White Oak Creek to the north of our project area. And that will also include a $100,000 commitment to Trees for Triangle with the intent to allocate plantings to the White Oak riparian buffer. And the Triangle Land Conservancy owns a significant amount of acreage around the White Oak Creek and is looking to actively expand their holdings from Cary west into the town. So I guess I'd like to close by saying we've been intentional about outreach with the neighbors. In addition, above and beyond to the neighborhood meeting, we understand that there's significant concerns that a number of the neighbors would prefer to see this area remain undeveloped or remain low-density residential. But the fact is that's not reality. There's the acreage constitutes over 90% of it are owned or controlled by 4 owners who are committed to selling and developing. And so we've been sincere to try to mitigate as many concerns as we can from the community, principally with traffic. And that's, again, I think evidenced by the 14+ acres of dedication that we're making for future interchange improvements, as well as a commitment to widen all of our frontage along 64 and 751. And so I know that doesn't placate a number of the concerns, but we did want to voice that we're doing our best and are sincere in trying to address the concerns from the community. So thank you for the time this evening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Any questions for Mr. Gorham or the applicant? No? All right.
What about the house that's on the western side of New Hill, corner of New Hill and 64?
The Burkett property, sir? Yeah, so we've, and Grady, jump in here if I misspeak, but we've been working in collaboration with CAP and had moving consultants on site. I think the intent is to relocate that property on site and to restore it. But that plans are actively underway right now. We've been utilizing, at the recommendation of CAP, their home moving consultant, and they're also going to be doing the slab preparation in concert with the relocation. But the intent is to relocate it on site and restore it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for the applicant? No? All right. I guess we'll open up the public comment section. I know that Mr. Seagrove had a question earlier in regards to some of his buffers.
Yes, and I failed to address that in my presentation. So the buffers, the additional buffer that is proposed by the applicant along the northern property boundaries would be required to be installed at the time the property is developed or redeveloped. And so there would be no requirement. He cited this portion here, which is cleared and has a house there. Nothing would be required to happen until such time that those parcels were to redevelop.
I believe you had a question also about the well.
That's a question that that staff that's present today would not be able to answer. I can say that the closest development that would be to that buffer would be at least 100 feet from the property line, as there is a tree save area and buffer required there. So there'd be at least 100-foot separation, but I can't speak to whether there would be any issues otherwise.
Ms. Kennedy Stokeskov.
Thank you, members of the Planning Board, and thank you, Walker, for the update. I was present for the neighborhood meeting online in October 10th, and basically I'd just like to reiterate some of the concerns that I heard from all people that were participating. And Walker has done a good job of addressing some of those concerns, and I will say that I think that Beacon Development actually understands the sensitivity of this area, both from longtime residents, who, yes, we would prefer it not to be developed, but I said in October that this is a done deal. But we want to do it in such a way that we mitigate the impact to this area. And I think you can appreciate on this map that we do have a lot of streams, riparian, perennial streams that do require the riparian buffer that were addressed. I can't remember if we're in the Neuse River Basin or the Cape Fear. Can anybody address that?
Cape Fear.
We are Cape Fear. Okay, so I don't know what the buffer requirements are for Cape Fear. I just know Neuse, which is 50. But 30 feet's pretty good, and it does take up a lot of area that normally would be used for development in a situation like this. And my question to you is that I've worked with developers in other parts of the state, and they have good intentions, but whatever the intentions are, sometimes there's oversight and things happen and it does adversely impact these areas. Who, I guess, is the watchdog for the people that are actually developing this to make sure that we don't adversely impact these sensitive areas? I don't know.
There would be staff.
And how diligent are you?
Well, I would like to say we have a great team here at the town of Apex, and we do look at all of these standards very closely. So during site plan review, we would be checking that any zoning conditions that were committed that are over and above our normal UDO or the state standards, that those would be implemented on the development plans.
Yes.
And then there'll be inspectors out in the field as construction is occurring to ensure that they're followed through.
Because once a mistake is made, it's often very difficult to mediate. So I just want to make sure that there is due diligence on the part of Apex going forward, even though I trust you guys, okay? But as I said, things happen. And the reason that people are concerned is because of the impact on wildlife. That's my background. I am a wildlife veterinarian, and in the 30-plus odd years that I've lived here, particularly with the development along Olive Chapel Road, there's been a change in how our wildlife corridors have been impacted and the type of wildlife that we see. And so that was expressed during the neighborhood meeting. And also the point was made that north of this area, and I'm not sure exactly where, we do have gamelands, and that means that there continues or would be hunting. And I've also seen that when you get development and you have lands that are contiguous for hunting, often the hunters will lose out because a lot of people, particularly people who are moving in from other areas, aren't used to the culture of hunters here. Just put that out there for your consideration. Okay, traffic. Everybody's concerned about traffic. It's already a mess. And when we asked Beacon, they said, well, we can't control the traffic. You have to ask the council. Well, you all can't control the traffic either. As you've said, it's DOT. And it does sound like the plan for the US 64 751 interchange is moving up, because last time I checked, it was 2035. And you're showing already a different scheme for it in the land that Beacon has set aside. Yeah, it's just a concern. It is hard getting out, and a lot of near misses, and I've had to come to a complete stop on 64 for people coming out, say from Sweetwater. So we are fifth, that area, the last I checked, that interchange is fifth for construction as far as priority along the 64 corridor. So we're not high up on the list. So I don't know how fast it's gonna move, and as I understand it, there's no money allocated yet for that change. I'm done, I'm over. Just two other things, and I don't have to really say anything about it, because light pollution is a concern, but there are rules for mitigating that. Noise versus sound. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, I will close the public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion and possible motions. Shannon, keep me honest, we have two items that we're voting on, correct? The land use apex, as well as the actual case 22 CZ 26.
Separate votes on each.
Right, thank you.
And Amanda, but I think before we go into discussion, I appreciate the neighbors' concerns about follow-through and sort of who would be in contact. I know there's the contact list sheet, but just want to reiterate that if you could just touch on that a little bit, of who neighbors, if they have concerns, who they would contact in the town.
Sure, any neighbor that received a invitation to the neighborhood meeting before the rezoning was submitted, included in that invitation was a list of who to contact based on various concerns. And certainly anyone can reach out to town planning staff, and we'd be happy to provide that list to them if they no longer have that.
Any discussion on the two items we have?
I do. I have a few points I wanted to make on the rezoning. I actually live directly north of this, across the Jordan Lake buffer, or the impoundment, and I back right up to the impoundment. And I tell you, what Ms. Stoskopf, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, the wildlife corridor there is immensely important for the hunters, environmentalists, everything. We have a nesting pair of bald eagles in our backyard. I mean, it's cool. And so I was hugely concerned when phase one came through, and then I saw the plans and I was like, ugh, kind of like bottle plant right there against the Jordan Lake, almost at the water. I was like, ugh. But phase two came in. I think they understood the concern. The environmental commitments that I saw here are pretty substantive. It's kind of echoing what the Jordan Lake watershed regulations are supposed to be, but the state has not enacted the nutrient controls that they should have. And so these folks are actually taking a step towards meeting those. So I'm appreciative of that. I don't love the use, but I appreciate what they're doing from the environmental standpoint. So I'm kind of in favor of it, although I'm not 100%, but I'm not opposed to it either. So that's where I'm standing right now.
I really appreciate the multi-jurisdictional effort that went into this, collaborating between Apex and Chatham County. It's a very impressive amount of acreage to get together, and it's going to take a heavy lift for infrastructure to make it happen, but the fact that there was collaboration and communication is really strong.
Any other comments? We have a possible motion on item 4, the Apex Gateway Phase 2 land use map.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I have a motion from Keith. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Sarah, Alyssa, who's gonna take? Alyssa's taking it? All right.
Sure.
So I have a motion from Keith and a second from Alyssa. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, so the land use map passes unanimously. And now I need a motion on the case 22 CZ 26 Apex Gateway Phase 2.
Motion to approve that also?
All right, I have a motion from Keith. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Tim will second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposing? All right, 22 CZ 26 passes unanimously as well. All right, that brings us on to new business, and I believe we need another motion to recuse Mr. Akers.
Again.
I will make a motion to recuse Mr. Akers.
Alyssa makes a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Sherman will second. All right, Mr. Akers, you are again recused. Hello, Amanda.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Jump back to the beginning. Okay, so this next item is for possible motion regarding adoption of the Viridia Environmental Enhancement Plan. And as Shannon mentioned, she kind of oriented you to where Viridia is, but it was developed or adopted to facilitate the development as a safe, healthy, resource-efficient, and transit-oriented mixed-use development, and is about just under 1,000 acres in size. And within the SD plan, the Sustainable Development Plan, basically the zoning conditions of the plan, is a requirement for an environmental enhancement plan, which is defined as additional sustainability standards related to environmental enhancement that's required to be submitted and follow basically the text amendment process, which is why this is a new business item and not a public hearing. So there are several sustainability standards included in this proposed environmental enhancement plan. And I'm just going to highlight some of the items that have been added. It's a lengthy document, and so I'm just going to highlight some of the things. So from the building standards section, there is a commitment that non-residential and residential development follow a certification process, either through LEED or Green Globes, EcoSelect, or a similar program that provides certifications for efficiency, energy efficiency. There is a requirement that at least 80% of the landscaping be drought-tolerant, native, and locally adaptive species. And there are also standards for indoor air quality and material management. For the environmental and natural resource protection highlights, the SD plan requires that Viridia set aside 100 acres as resource conservation area, and this is separate from other open space requirements in the plan. And there is a commitment that off-site RCA will not be used, so all of the RCA will be provided within the development. For the section on stormwater and surface water management highlights, there are a variety of types of SCMs that can be used, and the development is committing to treat the 25-year storm, which they're not required to do by the ordinance, so that is an increase in above what the UDO requires. I've talked about the native drought-tolerant plantings, and the utilization of stormwater reuse in the multifamily section for irrigation or other purposes. There is a commitment to providing signage prohibiting pet waste and use of fertilizers near environmentally insensitive areas. There was also at least 166 acres of riparian buffer within the development. When Viridia was first approved in 2011, there was the potential that a 30-foot buffer from riparian areas would be set aside, but this development is following the UDO rules of being able to average the 100-foot buffer that's required, and so this is what you see. The existing riparian buffers in gray, any areas of reduction in a light yellow. It's kind of hard to see along these areas. But then the additional buffer area to offset those reduced areas is shown in this peach color. And so on this map that's been reviewed by staff, you see an additional approximately 38 acres of buffer area above what's existing provided. And the developer has done a buffer call on the entire 1,000-acre development, which is quite substantial. So all of the buffers have been delineated and verified. And then there are also waste minimization standards for mulch stockpiles and soil stockpiles, perimeter buffers, and even a standard that deciduous trees will be planted on the south side of buildings and evergreens on the north sides where feasible. And from an air quality perspective, this is a mixed-use development, so it's designed to reduce or to increase internal trip capture so people can live, work, and play potentially all within the same area. Providing for an interconnected development with sidewalks, greenways, and walking trails. There's a commitment for a linear park along the future extension of Jesse Drive. There are street trees required along thoroughfares. And there's a commitment for 2 grade-separated pedestrian crossings where people will be able to cross under major thoroughfares instead of having to cross at grade. And a commitment for EV outlets in the garages of single-family homes. I did not include in here, also there is a commitment for solar conduit in single-family and townhome dwellings. So with that, I'm happy to, staff is recommending approval of the environmental enhancement plan, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Amanda? No? All right, and I guess we will discuss it amongst ourselves and have a possible motion.
I can't say no to sustainability. I'm a lead AP.
You can't say no.
I can't say
All
no.
right.
It's after my name. I would like to make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Motion from Sarah and a second from Tina. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, that passes unanimously. Amanda, I believe you're back.
Okay, this will be quick. We have a couple of UDO amendments for you this evening. The first is a follow-up from the amendments of last month where we made some adjustments to the warehouse and wholesaling uses. There was one section of the UDO where we needed to amend to reflect these changes to the use names and the additional use. And that is the buffer section where we classify uses for the purpose of determining perimeter buffers. So this is to clarify the use name for warehousing now general, add warehousing fulfillment center, and change the wholesaling use name to wholesaling distribution center. So that's Amendment 1. Any questions there? The next amendment is somewhat related. We found one more reference to wholesaling general, and then notice it's in the commercial use section, doesn't belong there. It needs to be captured by the industrial use standards, which all uses follow Schedule B. No change in parking requirement anyway, so it's just a cleanup item. Any questions on that one? And finally, there's a proposal to allow all agricultural uses to have the option to use gravel parking. We've had a request for the, if you're familiar, the Methodist Church had the community garden at the, across from the Walmart on the at Apex Peakway and Hughes Street, and they are needing to relocate. They found a property, but obviously don't want to provide paved parking for a agricultural community garden type use, and so we believe it's appropriate to give them the option of, and any agricultural use, to have the option for gravel parking. Most farms can be are considered bona fide farms, and according to state law, that releases them from zoning requirements, but a community garden is not eligible to be classified as a bona fide farm, so it would give them that flexibility. And staff is recommending approval of these amendments.
Amanda, if we had like a farmer's market that would be more of a commercial use, would that fall into like agriculture, or would that be a commercial? And could that in fact be a gravel?
So a farmer's market, I believe, is listed in our commercial use section, so it would be required to have paved parking.
I could see merit in having a farmer's market have stone.
Our current
Like-
farmer's market is located on.
For example,
Yeah.
Phillips Farm. in-
But that would be agriculture because
Well,
Okay.
Right, and so if it's
Even
a
if it's
farmer's
active
market
commercial,
that's
it's
associated with a bona fide farm, then they
Right.
could pretty much do whatever. We don't get to look at them, we don't review anything when it's a bona fide farm. But when it's separate, standalone, independent from any farm-related use, then, yeah, and typically those are pop-ups, they're not something that's existing a lot. So oftentimes they'll use an existing parking lot or.
food truck rodeos that are like kind of.
Right, so that's something we can maybe talk about, but for now, the proposal.
What about like where like Mr. A's Beignets, that parking lot, isn't that gravel? That's right here in downtown.
That's a different
It's not-
scenario.
That's a
Food
pop-up.
trucks are handled by the town code, not the UDO.
Oh.
On wheels, okay.
I just like gravel. I mean, just feel a little country. It's kind of cool.
I'd make a motion. Sorry, Ryan. Make a motion to approve the UDO amendments as proposed.
I
Thank
second.
you, Tina, and we got a second from Sarah. All right, good deal. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, these UDOs pass unanimously.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
You know what, Sarah, I was asking and you have given, thank you. And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Tim, all right. We are adjourned after we all agree. Do we agree?
We agree.
We agree? All right, ayes?
Aye.
All right, ayes.
Thank you.
We're closed. Thank you, folks.
Meet you at the farmer's market next week.
I can see that.